So I want to talk a little bit about the 80-20 rule because I think more and more people are becoming familiar with this training rule, but it's oftentimes misinterpreted or misapplied. So as far as what is the 80-20 rule, basically what it's saying is that 80% of your total training volume, whether it's mileage or time, that might differ depending on where you're looking, but 80% of your total training volume should be done at lower intensities, typically defined by heart rate zones, and then that leaves the remaining 20% to be done at moderate or higher intensities. Who does this apply to? That's a really, really important question that we have to ask with any research study, because if the population that's being studied is different from you, whatever conclusions are drawn from that study may not be applicable in terms of what you're trying to get out of it, whether it's treatment or training for yourself. So the population that is studied in most of these studies looking at the 80-20 rule, they're elite, high-level professionals that are oftentimes running 100 plus miles per week, which is just an astronomical number that many of us, or most of us, are not even coming close to approaching. So as far as when is this 80-20 rule necessary? Well, it's necessary for the population that's being studied. If we think about the toll that 100 plus miles of training takes on the body, there would be absolutely no way that you could do all 100 plus miles at high intensities. So they still get some high intensity work, roughly 20%, but then the 80% at lower intensities allows them to still get some training volume in, still get some of the unique benefits that low intensity training affords them. But the most important benefit is that it allows them to continue to train without a significant recovery cost. They actually are able to recover at these lower intensities while still training, and that allows them to then do the higher intensity training on different days. If we ask what training drives the most adaptations, most of the research is going to say that the higher intensity work drives most of the adaptations that these athletes are getting. If you look at, like, people are familiar with Tabata intervals, so these really, really high intensity intervals, short work to rest ratios, they drive significant cardiovascular adaptations compared to low intensity work, but these studies are done over the course of only a few weeks. There's a reason for that. It would be impossible to sustain these high intensity efforts over longer and longer periods of times, over months and years, that long-term training cycles demand to reach the highest levels of sport. So again, this 80-20 rule ties directly into this point where you need 80% at lower intensities because you just can't sustain much more than 20% high intensity when your total volume of work gets really, really high. So as far as how can we apply this coming off injuries, I think the first thing to recognize is that as we're coming off an injury, our total training volume is nowhere close to what the people being studied are doing for their training. So we likely don't need to scale back the amount of high intensity work as much as this 80-20 rule would suggest. Again, that's also not to say do all high intensity work, because we're not doing that much. We still have to progress gradually. We still have to pay attention to how quickly we're progressing intensity. But the point being is that the conversation is probably a little bit more nuanced and needs to be a little bit more individualized in terms of just how much intensity, just how much total volume we're giving to people as they work their way back. And that if we just follow this 80-20 rule blindly because that's what the professionals do, we're probably leaving something on the table in terms of how quickly we can get people back to their sport and get them back in shape.